All right, we're now joined by Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, former ambassador and Director of Risk Recon, for reaction on the decision by SADC to terminate that mandate of the SADC mission in the DRC. Good evening, Mr. Makhubela, Dr. Makhubela, rather. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Firstly, your reaction to just this decision to begin that phased withdrawal of troops deployed since 2023 in the eastern DRC.
Good evening, Fundo. You know, the communique does not give reasons why the withdrawal. It only says after a thorough review of the military situation in the DRC, they've decided to withdraw. And it goes back, Mfundo, to the mission of the semi-DRC, which was to fight the insurgency. And whether that mission has been accomplished, I think we all know that hasn't been done. So we would need to have, I think all of us, better reasons by our leaders in terms of the deployment and the withdrawal of the mission. Because remember, the state acts in a rational way. There must be rationality for deployment and rationality for withdrawal. So far, we don't have that. I only had President Ramaphosa say now during the press conference with the EU delegation that the withdrawal was triggered by the peace or the ceasefire that is holding. But that ceasefire has been unilateral. M23, they violate it as and when they need.
And that was going to be my next question, that the latest security update does not indicate that the situation is any better. They've actually noted a continued deterioration of the security situation. M23, of course, we know, has captured Goma, Bukavu, and blocked the main supply routes where humanitarian aid is supposed to flow. So could this have just been a situation where countries succumb to pressure of their citizens, because we know what has been happening in South Africa, where many citizens, even in parliament, they had that engagement where they said, perhaps the costs are just too high, we need to withdraw our troops, we just don't have the funding to ensure that they're properly capacitated in that mission?
You know, Mfundo, I think the time will still come to get better explanation. So far, the SADC has been very evasive about what are the reasons for the withdrawal. They have to explain if the mission was accomplished. Here in South Africa, there's been a very confusing message that is carried out by public officials, saying this is a peacekeeping mission, and yet, in terms of the SADC mandate, it was an intervention mission, actually operating in terms of the joint security arrangement. Have they really accomplished that? And I think at one stage we need better explanation, all of us, to get a better understanding as to what really triggered this. Was it public pressure? It was a mission, as the mission failed to achieve its objective. If the mission has failed, why now? And then of course now you get the argument by the SADC that will now embark on a diplomatic solution. They are starting the other way around. That's where they should have first begun. A peaceful resolution.
Doctor, we've heard from some others leaning towards perhaps the mission having been failed in this respect, that really if you look at the captured cities, that perhaps here it is a mission that has failed and you've got our troops stuck in Sake, they now need to be withdrawn in that phased approach. So perhaps maybe that is the real situation on the ground, but most certainly one that might not be communicated, that the mission has failed. But we understand, at the very least, having listened to Angola, that what's going to happen now is that you've got the Nairobi and Luanda processes that have been amalgamated. You're getting more people that will be part of those negotiations. And of course, we know that now the DRC is willing to meet next week with M23, where for the longest time we had heard from the president of the DRC, his position that he was not willing to legitimize M23 and elevate them to a level where they can engage a state president because they are not a state.
You know, the M23 has gained traction. They've captured more land and more occupied more areas. I mean, they've taken the whole of South Kivu now. They're actually poised and really threatening the Katanga province, which is another major province if they were to do incursion. And they've made it quite clear that their intention is to march to Kinshasa. They are starting to mobilize in areas they are occupying, building their war chest and getting more military personnel to join. I've seen reports that they are making about $800,000 a month from the illegal mining. And they've kept strategic mines even in South Kivu. So they are better positioned. So the view that there's a peace that is holding perhaps this peace that is, or ceasefire that is holding, rather, it's a ceasefire between the semi-DRC and the M23. But in terms of the totality of the country is still at war.
Mm-hmm. And then just in closing now, when we're hearing that what will resolve or ensure that there's lasting peace in the DRC is some sort of a political solution, that here we need to go back to the drawing board and they must rely on diplomacy. Do you see this working?
You know, there are peace agreements that were entered into through a lengthy process that took place during the Sun City talks, the Pretoria talks that were held, and there was an agreement with Rwanda with respect to that. I only hope, Mfundo, that they would go back to the drawing board and look into this agreement and see how best to implement this agreement. I'm a bit worried if they were to start the discussions now, it would take many more years. And meanwhile, the suffering on the ground is going on. I think that's what it's required in my own view. But I don't know if people have the courage really to revisit those agreements. Of course, there may be new issues that have come into the conflict, because that's the nature of intractable conflict. They keep on developing new intractability, but you really need to go and address the root causes of the conflict. Joseph Kabila said the same thing, that, you know, a military solution, it's not the viable one. It will not work. It has never worked. And I think in the SADC mission, have realized that they really need a diplomatic solution to the problem.
Mm-hmm. No, most certainly. You also raise a very important question there, that we need clarity on what informed this withdrawal. That if we understood why they were deployed in the first place, we need greater clarity as to what informs the decision to withdraw now. Is really that peace agreement holding, or perhaps there was pressure from citizens of various countries to say withdraw, we just don't have capacity. But Doctor, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. That's Dr. Kingsley Makhubela speaking to us there. He's a former ambassador and the Director of Risk Recon.